You don't have to tell me twice, or a couple thousand times. Let's talk about school dress codes. Hello, Internet! Welcome to Style Theory, where you always get a gold star for perfect attendance. In between getting your master's in theoretical sciences across these channels, you might be attending, real school. In fact, based on the comments on our last episode where we covered school uniforms, a lot of you are currently in school or have yourself some very vivid memories about your time there, specifically about what you wore. In that episode, we discussed the impact, or lack thereof, of uniforms on school performance. But of course, researching for that one topic actually opened up a whole can of worms about a related topic: dress codes on school campuses. If your school didn't have a uniform, then I'd bet my bottom dollar that you, like me and my pleated pants, had yourself a different set of rules for what you could and could not wear, aka the dress code. School dress codes are pretty infamous at this point.
We're talking about the school dress codes.
That controversial video is one of two videos students saw on the second day of school regarding the dress code.
A dress code, a dress standard is pretty normal.
A school district's dress code is creating even more controversy tonight for a middle school student.
You get the idea. And they're not just an American thing either. They're a universal feature of schools the world over. So with them being literally everywhere, I think it's finally time someone asks, should schools have dress codes? Are they actually doing anything? Is there scientific evidence that having a dress code in schools improves people's grades, or improves their well-being, or improves really anything about the school experience? Or are these sets of seemingly arbitrary rules doing more harm than good? The next time you get hauled into detention because your strap was a little too spaghetti and not an entire lasagna noodle, do you have a case to be made that the system is a scam? Well, my friends, there's only one way to find out, so ring the bell. Class is now in session. Advocates of dress codes tend to argue that the benefits can boil down into three main categories. They're designed to promote 1, the success of the students, 2, the safety of the students, and 3, individual expression for those students, allowing me to keep it spicy in high school by switching up my silk shirts and quintuple pleated dockers. But before we dive into any of these individual categories, it's important to establish where the codes came from in the first place. You see, in the US, they have themselves an unexpected origin. Believe it or not, but school dress codes started with students way back in the 1960s, and all because they were protesting the Vietnam War. Yeah, that's the one that your grandpa probably talks about, with the peak of anti-war protests happening in the late 1960s. If you're not an American history buff, or, you're not an American at all, here's the TLDR. From 1965 to 1973, the US was engaged in a highly controversial war in Vietnam, in which the US wound up drafting a whopping 2.2 million young men between the ages of 21 and 26. Many of these kids wound up overseas and ended up being part of the 58,000 troops who died as a part of this war. Again, almost all young men a couple years out of high school being forced to fight in a war that many didn't agree with. One major form of anti-war protest was fashion, mostly worn by school kids who are showcasing the fact that they disagreed with the war and the draft. We know a lot of these clothes today based on the historical stereotypes. This was hippie culture at its peak. Loose bohemian clothing, bright colors, bell bottoms. But the powder keg for conflict with US schools was a clothing item that's a little less well known from the period. At the time, students protested by wearing black armbands to school, which became a specific nationwide symbol for school kids who were protesting the war. After students began being suspended for wearing these black armbands, they took the issue to court, saying that this was an issue of free speech. Schools were breaking a fundamental First Amendment right. This case, Tinker versus Des Moines, went all the way to the Supreme Court, where they ruled that the students could in fact keep their armbands. But in making this decision, they also laid the groundwork for the first legal dress codes in the US. Specifically, their ruling stated, quote, "In our system, state-operated schools may not be enclaves of totalitarianism. In the absence of a specific showing of constitutionally valid reasons to regulate their speech, students are entitled to freedom of expression of their views." But even though the courts now said that children could wear any clothes that their teachers or schools might not agree with, the Supreme Court also drew the line in one very important place. The ruling stated that students may not materially disrupt the school process or the education of others with their clothing. Quote again, "The state has an obligation to try to move directly against those causing the disruption rather than take away the First Amendment right of expression. A material and substantial disruption to the schools would justify perhaps the subordination of freedom of expression." And oh boy, that last line has opened the door for some broad interpretations, leading to some wild dress code mandates. So then what the heck does materially disruptive mean? Well, let's just rip the band-aid off now. No one knows. It is super subjective, but let me tell you, almost every dress code we read while researching for this episode used it, and used it repeatedly. Your school probably has it in there too, so if you see it in the dress code, now you know the court case where it originated from. But now that we know the history, it's time to look at the efficacy of all this. As I mentioned before, dress codes are meant to help students students succeed and stay safe, all while still allowing them enough personal freedoms to express themselves through their clothing. So, do dress codes do those things? Let's just start with one that should be easy to measure: school performance. In justifications for dress codes, schools focus on the idea that they improve school performance. This is one that comes up again and again and again. But how is it meant to do that? Well, sometimes it makes sense, like with the ban on JoJo Siwa hair bows. They're not allowed because they're frickin' huge. Apparently they were so large that kids couldn't see the whiteboards around them. So yeah, that's gonna be a wee bit disruptive. But then, why are spaghetti straps disruptive? Muscle tees. There's a lot less material in those garments, not more, so my view of the board is gonna stay relatively unobstructed. Why then are these two of the most commonly flagged items on dress codes? Well, because as the reasoning goes, they're distracting. Clearly our feeble teenage meat brains can't focus on the Pythagorean theorem when there's a bare shoulder sitting 2 rows in front of us. Not only is that incredibly offensive to assume, it's also completely unsubstantiated by the data. The most comprehensive study that I could find was this one from Educational Partnership Inc., dating all the way back to the Clinton administration decades ago. The source here isn't necessarily unbiased, and the research is very limited, but even here the results are heavily mixed. Some studies indicated a small margin of better grades for schools with dress codes, but most, yeah, they showed no difference at all. And that's not all that surprising. I mean, back in the 70s when dress codes first started rearing their heads, seeing a shoulder peeking out from a tank top might have been scandalous. But it's 2023 now. Browse through Twitter's trending tab for 5 minutes, and I guarantee you've accidentally subjected yourself to multiple full-body anatomy lessons. Overall, dress codes seem more like wishful thinking than a path to academic achievement. We don't need to say it's a flat-out lie or anything, it's just that there's no evidence that exists to support it. That said, what about the other criteria here? Safety. We usually associate dress codes with annoying stuff. Your top is too cropped, your pants are too baggy. It's obnoxious to be sure, but generally it's not that hard to wrap your brain around. But what exactly makes clothing safe? Is the waistband of my boxers suddenly gonna sucker punch Brian from 3rd period PE? Obviously not. No, similar to the distracting clothing, some of the bans here make sense, like on jewelry that could be used as a weapon. Spiked necklaces, oversized rings. Sorry, my baby emos, all those hot topic accessories are gonna have to stay at home. But if you take the idea of safety and start following it out further, it starts getting into the less clear territory where the rules shift away from the item itself to instead what's on the item. Here's a typical quote from a dress code: any clothing that contains inappropriate language, symbols, or messages which are offensive and disrupt the learning environment. Most schools then go on to add examples: images or text that are offensive and target specific groups, explicit material, or stuff that promotes drug or alcohol use. In recent years though, those gray areas have gotten increasingly gray as a number of fringe cases have started to crop up. For instance, in the case New Jersey versus Sonnabend, 2 students from 2 separate school districts sued after being instructed to cover up their t-shirts that displayed images of firearms. Here's what the shirts looked like. Are they safe? Are they not safe? What's more, that orange one is specifically promoting a pro-gun rights organization. By asking the student to cover it up, the school was censoring that message. So what's the more important consideration here? Protection of free speech, or the possibility that seeing the message might disrupt the education of other students, especially when violence in schools is currently a top concern on everyone's mind. Ultimately, New Jersey determined that moving forward, wearing a picture of a weapon has to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. It's not really the cleanest, easiest to follow solution. It starts going even deeper when you start thinking about issues like gang violence, where it's well known that gang associations can be expressed through clothing. An article from The Atlantic a few years ago reads, quote, "Because one of the Atlanta area gangs had adopted Mickey Mouse as one of the symbols, we were not allowed to wear anything with Mickey Mouse on it. We weren't allowed to wear any Dickies brand clothing or backpacks. They were considered a gang symbol." I mean, by that logic, now any brand or character can be considered dangerous to a school district. And of course, this means that now dress codes are having to chase a moving target. Gangs can change their style, but also the fashion trends themselves evolve and change. For a while, having a long hanging belt was considered to be a gang sign, especially when it was partnered with a particular buckle. But pretty soon, that just became the de facto belt for a lot of people. It was fashionable. It was the trend. Same thing with the whole bagging and sagging look that was surging throughout the early 90s. It started as the go-to fashion for many urban communities, some with gangs, many without. But as the style got more visibility through music videos and movies, it just became a fashion trend. And then the greater problem with all of this is that you can quickly slide from items that are actual symbols of violence to just symbols that represent groups of people. And it's here where school dress codes start to get real dicey. Over the years, there have been a whole slew of debates about specific items in school dress codes that start to blur the lines between keeping kids safe and targeting specific groups based on race, ethnicity, or gender identity. Under the US's Title IX, which is a set of gender equality rules for US schools that was developed back in the 70s, school dress codes are expressly forbidden from unfairly targeting women. However, if you take a look at this chart from Education Week in 2022, you see that when you average out all the most common rules rules across dress codes, 90% are worded in a way that specifically targets girls. Only 69% are associated with boys' clothing. They also found that statistically, girls are 5.5 times more likely to get in trouble for their clothing than boys. You might assume that this is just the result of girls' clothing being more risque or prone to breaking the rules, but that also isn't necessarily true. It happens even when a boy is wearing the same clothing or breaking the same rules. A student from Illinois named Drew Jarding went viral for his TikToks where he wore the same types of outfits as his female peers, all to illustrate how his clothes were considered okay by school standards while theirs were not. This is just one of many instances where girls are sent home, suspended, or even potentially losing scholarships over showing their shoulders.
The senior with a 4.4 GPA suspended for 10 days, told she can't walk at graduation.
A full ride means so much, and that is on the line right now.
Across both male and female students, it gets worse when you consider race. A lot worse. For instance, in the 1990s, baggy jeans, oversized shirts, and other loose-fitting garments were commonly worn in hip-hop culture, which made a significant impact in trendy fashion for mainstream black communities. As such, black students were called out more often with dress codes related to baggy clothing and oversized t-shirts because they were deemed as looking quote-unquote unprofessional. And these same biases apply to commonplace items like hair wraps and headscarves for women or do-rags and hats for men. Hairstyle rules also make it harder for black students to comply. Frequently, dress codes will dictate that a man's hair can't go past their eyebrows. This, in turn, actively targets longer hairstyles like braids and dreadlocks, which have historically been associated with black communities. And statistically, these small rules add up to make a significant difference. Black female students in some major school districts like Washington, D.C. are reportedly 21 times as likely to get suspended from school than their white female counterparts. And these are just a few examples. From our own Team Theorist ranks, food theory creative director Santi has had experiences of dress codes that are biased based on his own normal features.
Back in high school, I had to sit down with the principal, vice principal, and a board member of the school because I'd received 5 months of detention for violating the dress code. I'd gotten a bunch of write-ups because the stubble I'd get by the end of the school day was deemed inappropriate since we had to be clean shaven. Not something I could really help outside of taking a razor to school for a midday shave, so I fought back and not only avoided detention, but was allowed to keep my facial hair since I was graduating at the end of the year.
He ended up winning the argument, but students shouldn't have to fight like that. Worse, these sorts of policies can result in students getting suspended, leading to statistics that are a lot scarier than just a few detentions. Up to this point, we've been talking about clothes and the annoying little infractions that they can get you in school, but the real stinger of school dress codes is that they don't just stop at school. A buildup of small infractions in many schools can lead to students being removed from classrooms, which then leads to the question, what happens when students get suspended? Well, the data shows that when a student misses classes, surprise, surprise, they have worse academic outcomes. Making matters worse, 81% of major public universities take a student's disciplinary record into account in admissions decisions. Students who are suspended also are statistically more likely to get into trouble, arrested, even drop out of school entirely. In school districts with strictly enforced dress codes, students are 32% more likely to get out of school suspensions. In short, stricter dress codes mathematically lead to more missed classes. On top of that, strictly enforced dress codes are more common in communities with black and Hispanic majorities. 80% of black majority schools are reported to have strictly enforced dress codes versus 62% of predominantly Hispanic schools and only 35% of white majority schools. Clothes matter. The people dress codes target matter. And at the moment, there's evidence that dress codes disproportionately hurt the success of very specific student groups. As a student told HHStoday.com,
and they say it's for like education, like to protect everyone else's education.
And that's non-biased.
Yeah, how is my education being protected whenever I am getting taken out of class?
Quite simply, when you look at the numbers, the scale isn't balanced. What then is our solution? Well, drum roll please. School uniforms. Everyone dresses the same. Oh, shoot. I already did a takedown of those a couple months ago. Nudists? No, that'd probably be materially distracting. It's almost like there needs to be a middle ground between the two extremes. Something a little less restrictive than a uniform mandating just 5 possible items bought from a store with a monopoly over said items of clothing, but something that isn't as broad as anything goes, or as confusing as, well, you can only show off your midriff on the 3rd Wednesday of any month in which there's a harvest moon and only if the administration is signed off in totality. Playing whack-a-mole with clothing, it's just too hard for administrations, and it's also too too frustrating for students. Honestly, the best that I can come up with in my few hours of thinking about it is what I'd call the YouTuber policy. What I mean by that is that whenever I'm in a shoot with someone else, I always get this mandate of not wearing anything with logos or brands on it, because if it appears on camera, it could get the production in trouble. So that then gives me a very clear set of rules to follow. It allows me to wear any colors or patterns that I want, or any individual piece of clothing that I want to use to express my style and personality, but also I'm not having to worry about any potential gray areas. Would that be the perfect solution for schools? I don't think so, but it might be a step to clarifying what's currently set up to be a very complicated issue. And here's the thing, there is a small silver lining here as bit by bit more people are catching on to the problem. There are so many small infractions around things like dress codes in US schools that in 2021, the Common App for colleges removed their questions asking about a student's disciplinary records, because there were just so many, and also much worse, there was a disproportionately high rate of disciplinary actions for minority students. In the end, what seems like silly or arbitrary rules ultimately do matter, and they do affect people's actual lives long term. If you're in school right now, just be aware that the kids around you might find it harder to avoid detentions than you, and look for little ways to support them if you can. Or know that even though you might be the one facing down the daunting dress code, keep your eye on the prize. Just get out and get to college. They don't care what the heck you're wearing over there anyway. Or heck, even better, online classes are more convenient and cheaper these days. And hey, when you're sitting at a computer, the only dress code is that you're not wearing pants. But hey, that's just a theory. A style theory. Keep looking sharp.